The advent on Earth of the Logos Samael, genie of the Force and region of planet Mars.
With this reflection on this year 2004, in which we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the incarnation on Earth of the Logos Samael, we offer through this video the most noteworthy of his existence, that although modest and austere on the outside, was profound and rich in esoteric experiences on the inside. Highlighting the most relevant aspects of his 60 years of life, from 1917 through his last year in 1977, in particular his last 30 years, which were esoterically his most prolific period, where the Master wrote the most important aspects of his work, which in essence are the roadmap to attaining the great inner work.
But it is not only his path. The great inner work is also the opportunity for all of us to do the work. His path could also be our path, like that of Jesus Christ and all those who follow his teachings. And if Samael was able to live it to a greater or lesser extent, each one of us can also live it. Because this is the meaning of the Christian gospel, to imitate or live like Christ. That is the imitation of Christ that Master Samael speaks about in his incarnation as Thomas of Kempis. Thus, Samael's teaching should be meditated upon. It doesn't matter whether we're young or old, or without the possibility to practice sexual alchemy. Absolutely, the whole process of the great work should be meditated upon through his books. The Three Mountains, The Mystery of the Golden Blossom, Yes, There Is Hell, Yes, There Is a Devil, and Yes, There Is Karma, Revolutionary Psychology, etc., so that the conscience recognizes the only path towards self-realization. Consequently, the entire esoteric book chronology of Master Samael is to be meditated upon. Through contemplation, we allow that his word, like a river of pure and crystalline waters, slides and tinkles within us, so that the part of our consciousness that's free first becomes active, then continues reaffirming its own spiritual concerns, and in the present or future incarnation, definitely aspire to live the passion of the Lord as the tradition that comes from the Gnostic revelation has taught it.
Close to spring in the year 1917, exactly the 6th of March, will be born with the profane human name of Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez, the one that will be the Bodhisattva of the Master Aun Weor, and subsequently Aun Weor, already as a master, on the 27th of October of 1954, will produce himself the magical advent of the Logos Samael, regent of the planet Mars, genie of the Force, and the fifth of the seven, thus the avatar of the new age of Aquarius, of this, the fifth race, of us, the Aryans.
We all read in the books, Samael Aun Weor, and a few know that first it was Master Aun Weor. Before Aun Weor, he was Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez. We could say the South American personality of a last incarnation, that the real being Samael had before initiating the path rising up for the third time. Before this Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez, we have Daniel Coronado. In northern Mexico, there's a street named after Daniel Coronado because he was one of the Dorados, golden ones of Pancho Villa. And this is well narrated and explained by Samael in his books, especially in a chapter from the book, The Mystery of the Golden Blossom, where he talks about reincarnation. Chapter 38, chapter 39 are two chapters that are important and should be studied. Before being Daniel Coronado, there is also the incarnation of Simon Blair, a British man that crossed the Atlantic, also explained in that book, and Juan Conrado, a Spanish personage that was part of the Middle Ages, and of whom Samael also tells a story lived in that incarnation. All this process so we can understand the importance of that. In the year 1917, Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez was born.
Therefore, to accustom only to the divine and supernatural image of Samael, the mage and master, ignoring the human aspect of the falling bodhisattva does not favor us all, only to a few. But to learn the transmigration processes suffered by his soul is highly instructive for all of us, because it fills us up with great esoteric hope. And there are those who denominate him, with just reason, Red Christ of Aquarius, because he effectively lived the whole necessary Christic process for it, the path of salvation promised by Master Jesus. It is also certain that with our Venerable Master, we can repeat the same of the mystified Jesus, that as a historic man is completely lost for humanity, and as such difficult to imitate. When separating Samael the man from humanity, his message will also be forgotten. We would have obtained that no one would feel worthy in front of the Master as to follow him. Elevated Samael to the altars and his terrestrial life forgotten, it is natural that no one will be motivated towards the path of the great inner work.
Definitely, it is very important to study chapters 38 and 39 of the mystery of the Golden Blossom, the law of recurrence, and of the transmigration of souls, respectively, because in them our Master reveals himself human and incredibly pre-human. It's to say as a humanoid, because he also was once an elemental of nature, and he needed to be born for a second time as a real man. This is the Samael we need to first recognize before that one of divine nature. The elemental Samael, the man, the father of a family, that fallen bodhisattva, distance from the real path, because it had to be that way in order to be able to obtain the necessary experience to reach more occult places of the absolute abstract space. Likewise, the terrestrial is subject to the divine. The latter, through the school of life, can be continuously essayed. Precisely, it is in the labyrinth of the school of life, the Master tells us in his book, The Three Mountains, how he found again his guru, that Master who in a past cosmic life taught him the ancient path of the razor's edge, the path for obtaining for the third time the philosopher's stone.
Samael states, I myself, I'm going to relate what I have directly experienced for the good of the great cause, what I have lived in my 3 previous incarnations. As such, he recounts his 3 incarnations, which lets us see the challenges he suffered, the standing man, the mistakes he made, the big karma he carried with him, his continuous travels, going from Europe to America and from America back to Europe in different time periods, incredibly repeating the same voyages in the subsequent incarnation, encountering and re-encountering sometimes, even completely distancing himself from his wife Litilantes. All this process becomes a mirror, an image where we all can see ourselves as well, since in a certain way, all of us that arrive at the Gnostic teachings don't come with an easy baggage. We have certain values which have allowed us to receive the teachings, but on our backs also weighs the karma of our wrongdoing in the past, and that causes many people to feel impotent for knowing they can't put into practice everything that the initiatic path requires.
These 2 chapters from the mystery of the Golden Blossom describe the physical birth of Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez, the incarnation of Daniel Coronado in northern Mexico, when he was part of the Pancho Villa Golden Ones. And when, because it was not the appropriate time for the Logos Samael to begin with the Gnostic teachings and the esoteric path, then he would occupy himself in social work, also just. His Bodhishita, that is to say his soul aspiring to masterhood, in that moment was inclined by compassion towards the people, that as he himself has said, suffered under the Mexican dictatorship. Then, from northern Mexico, he organized a group of peasants and armed them with all his resources and contributed to Pancho Villa's revolution.
Although that has its karmic consequences, because one has to kill, has to do this and that at the same time, it has to have its positive values as to achieve that people be liberated from a certain burden, from a certain painful karma, Then all that process formed him. He created certain values that allowed him to later on become Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez, who since an early age started to search for the teachings. Since that Daniel Coronado, when the revolution is over, comes to Mexico City, and in Mexico City he develops an interest for the metaphysical, creates a small group, a small nucleus of people, to study metaphysical and philosophical topics, and then disincarnates. Disincarnates in order to re-encounter in the reincarnation as Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez, again that group of students in Mexico City, where he practically lived the last years of his life until accomplishing the second mountain. Then, in a certain way, we all plant and collect in the path from the labor that we are doing. To me, it seems important that we realize that the present incarnation, the one we have now, is a consequence of the previous one, and that such a thing happens not only to us, but also happens even to an avatar. It happens to a Christ, to a Samael, or to a Jesus. All of them had to live through these processes as well. If one wants to know the processes, for example, of the life of Jesus, his previous incarnations, it's a little bit hard. We don't have much information. But by words of Master Samael, that states that Joshua, the one of the Jericho or Jericho trumpets established by the Bible, we can find, says Samael, in Joshua the incarnation he had before the one in which he was named Jesus. Joshua is the same Jesus, and Joshua also forgives a whore, a prostitute, and furthermore also reunites 12 tribes. That is to say what Jesus did with the 12 apostles. To study Joshua is to study Jesus. To study Jesus is to understand Joshua. Likewise, to study Samael, for example, in the case of incarnation as Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez, is to understand also that one as Daniel Coronado. And to study Daniel Coronado surely will be to understand as well that Simon Bleller, the British man that at an early age felt the need to go to Spain, and in Spain the need again to embark in a caravel, a ship, cross the Atlantic with the qualm of making fortune, or of going to other lands to repeat the same things he had lived in other times. In other words, all these travels, pilgrimages, all we do in life are nothing more than a repetition. Samael intends for us to understand that for us to realize how important it is that any person, even without being affiliated to an esoteric school, but who dedicates to social work with humanity, prepares the means, paves the way that will allow one to reach that incarnation where one will be able to dedicate to the great work.
How many of us who come for the first time to a Gnostic association can realize that before this life there was a previous one that created the merits needed in order to find the teachings in this existence? And if it wasn't so, then this one should be occupied in meeting the conditions to begin walking the path. The problems we all say to have, and which stand between the challenges of the path itself, are in reality the outstanding karmic consequences of past incarnations. A grave mistake is to think, believe, assume that our problems, family, economic, or the disadvantage of our age, are evidence that we should not engage in esoteric work. And as such, we also think of those students that accompany us. We ignore that this incarnation is a consequence of our previous incarnations, which gave us our first merits. This incarnation will be the one to continue creating new merits, and even though we might not reach our objective, what is important is to feel oneself, to know oneself as walking the path.
Master Samael also instructs us in his chapter that talks about the transmigration of the soul, where he relates what he lived in a past cosmic day, when he had not yet reached the level of an authentic man. He relates to us his existence as a simple elemental of nature, evolving just enough to reach the level of a humanoid. In other words, an elemental dressed with a human body, but not yet humanized, since he had not created the essential bodies of the being.
Then I was just a wretched intellectual animal, sentenced to living. I had gone from bad to worst, reincarnating, digressing myself from masculine or feminine organisms, according to the cause and effect of karma. I must honestly confess that Mother Nature uselessly worked creating my bodies, which I always destroyed with my passions and vices.
Just like there are individuals that come to the Gnostic associations that have not yet created these three vehicles of the being, and are many, thus it's useful to keep in mind the chapter about the transmigration of the soul. There Samael relates with that elephant's memory that he has, this ability to go backward, and he cites that in a planet of a past cosmic day, when I had not yet created the astral, mental, and causal body, I was a humanoid, and I lived in a time similar to that of this time. And he began to narrate all that which he lived. And then in the last incarnation of 3,000 cycles, one cycle of 108 existences I lived, I remember perfectly how the last incarnation was, how I degenerated completely, and how spiritual matters did not interest me. Then I fell down backwards in time. In the second death, in the involutive process, I went backwards, and passed through the process as a humanoid, mineraloid, animaloid. And then finally he saw himself into animal figures, and how he took vegetable figures, and finally in mineral form. And then came a time when as a mineral form he did not make an effort to think. He fell in a terrible and boring laziness, and in a total sexual degeneration. He will join any lava that passed through there. It was a terrible thing. Frightening how he narrates that by his own words. Then he went back, till finally the second death came. And as an elemental, he freed himself from that last mineral body. And then again converted into a beautiful elemental creature. The divas checked him. There was nothing. The ego had been destroyed, not by him, by the involution. And then again he was given a new opportunity to again begin the ascendant process through the way of mineral, vegetal, animal, and human evolution. So he also tells that process.
When Samael talks about involution and evolution, it is not that he has read a certain author or looked at the 10th card of the tarot, and there he discovered the existence of evolution and involution. He didn't need to look at a certain image to discover these two laws. No, he wants to tell us he relates what he has lived through his processes, because his esoteric knowledge belongs to what we could understand as an innate occultism. In other words, an esoteric knowledge that he remembers and that he has not forgotten in himself.
Accustomed to swim among the fish, he tells us how, at the beginning, he situated at the head of the pack that was swimming in the deep oceans. He was at the front, and a large fish, a monster, would burst in and eat him. He eventually learned, as he incarnated in animal forms, that he should place himself not at the front, not at the back, in the middle to learn how to move in that world of the animals. And all those experiences he communicates to us as an incredible experience, an experience personally lived. Eventually he finally attains the body of a humanoid. And finally he said, I don't want to again end my 108 cycles of existences. I don't want to fall backwards again. I already know the suffering one undergoes involuting.
And then the soul embryo of Samael decides to start looking for the secret path of self-realization. And this is why the guru appears, the one who will show him the science of how to create an astral body, a mental body, and a causal body, to first obtain the level of an authentic man, which means not to be subject to the 3,000 cycles, each one with its 108 existences. Since it is well known that an authentic man, although not self-realized, as a bodhisattva, is no longer subject to the wheel of life.
In 1917, with the birth of Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez, a new and important chapter for humanity begins, which is a preview of what would come 2 years later. Let's find out why this affirmation in the words of Master Samael himself. Really, during the Iron Age, thousands of bodhisattvas fell. Nirvana has time periods of great activity and time periods of inactivity. From February 19, 1919, Nirvana entered into a period of activity, since the end of times are here and we need assistance. At 4 p.m. on February 19th, millions of virgins from Nirvana began to be born. Millions of virgins from Nirvana are reincarnating now to help us. It's amazing to see those virgins reincarnating now as poor women, as humble servants.
Master Samael states that nirvana, which had been for a period of time closed to humans, opens its gates to humanity in the inner worlds of course, thus entering nirvana into a period of activity. This seems to me is a chapter of great importance in Samael's work, that we become able to understand that in the year 1919 this has happened. Curiously, in the month of February as well. This leads to thinking about the new age of Aquarius that started on February 4th, 1962. They are two distinct dates, but they complement each other very well. It was also on a February, exactly on Aquarius, that on the 19th, Nirvana opens its doors. Where do we find Nirvana? Obviously in the superior worlds of consciousness. Nirvana is found between the logoic triangle Keter, Chokma, and Bina, and the ethical triangle Atman, Buddhi, Manas.
And 37 years after the birth of Victor Manuel Gomez Rodriguez in 1954, an event will occur that will be one of the most transcendent Gnostic events in the 20th century, and which forms part of the origins of her esoteric institution. The incarnation of a cosmo creator in his Dhyani Bodhisattva, in this case of Samael Aun Weor, occurred on October 27th, 8 years before the beginning of the age of Aquarius, and which substantiated at the Summum Supremum Sanctuarum of the Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta, Colombia, South America.
Samael in the year 1947 awakens the Kundalini fire, and upon this awakening of the Kundalini, he enters the realm of the masters who will begin to rise. He is not yet aware of the gigantic mission he needs to accomplish. But he awakens the Kundalini, and gradually the year 1954 comes, where the incarnation of his being, the Logos Samael in Master Aun Weor occurs. Aun Weor is the human soul, and Samael is the Logos. The Logos incarnated in Aun Weor becomes the venerable Master Samael Aun Weor.
Some witnesses state that on October 27th at 2 in the afternoon, Master Aun Weor met with brothers of the temple and some bodhisattvas of masters, among which the following are remembered: Joani, Pakonder, Sumsumdum, Safagarata, Pavoni, Andres, Litalantes, Kefren, Jonas, Mon, Zancario Corenza, Tarom, and others. Master Aun Weor was laid on a hard table. A big chain was formed around him, and some time later, Master Aun Weor, as well as the participants of that chain, began to receive all sorts of attacks. Then it was necessary that the brothers brandish their swords in order to exorcise the evil forces. The ceremony lasted 4 hours, and during its course, Master Aun Weor died, which frightened all those present. One of the bodhisattvas present described in a spiritual vision how the mountain of the Sierra Nevada got illuminated with the arrival of the 5th angel of the apocalypse. He descended from the superior worlds in a splendid carriage. Masters of the White Brotherhood assisted, and Samael issued orders. Great anxiety overcame all present. Sinister forces covered with black bandage some of the members in the chain so they could not see or bring memories. After 4 hours of battle, the body of the master moved and the advent of Samael was obtained. Great joy was felt among all those present, screaming simultaneously, "We triumphed!" Ineffable music was heard in the inner worlds. Joyful bells announced the adventment.
In this manner, an important process for humanity began, since on this event are present Litilantes, Rabolu, and other masters. Even among them is the famous Giovanni, of whom it's said is the fallen bodhisattva of John of Patmos, who wrote the Apocalypse of John. When one reads the Apocalypse of John, one understands the relationship Master Litilantes will have with them with that apocalyptic process of humanity, and how he, as an avatar, fulfilled an important mission, and how she, alongside, as an agent of the law, is who ordered those 4 angels to stop blowing, to cause no harm to anything, until the chosen ones are stamped on their foreheads. Then a pause is produced with the 6th seal of the Apocalypse, a pause that allows this angel, who by those days, says Samael, did not give her name, it wasn't allowed, that this angel, that in a certain way is like a lawyer for us in front of the law, and is the one who in a certain manner has a very important mission to fulfill. Then it is very interesting how all these events come together, conjugate, at the Sierra Nevada, so that the final process for humanity begins for this 5th Aryan race.
The discovery that Aun Weor is Samael is very revolutionary. It means that Samael, the 5th angel of the 7 cosmo creators, of the 7 angels, of the 7 spirits before the throne of the Lamb, now like the region of the Aryan race, has a very important message to transmit, to communicate to humanity. Thus the first works are written, not only that perfect matrimony, school of kinder, or the entrance door to initiation, but the interesting part of this process is that it will follow the publication of the Revolution of Bel, work in which Master Samael explains its being's own mission.
Therefore, in this manner, a very important, very secret revolution begins in the heart of Colombia, in that part of Santa Marta where that famous mountain is, and where later the Summum Supremum Sanctuary would be built, and where at the summit are the Mamas, which means enlightened ones. Those Kagi Aborigines who never were conquered by the Europeans, and who remain practically untouchable, virgins, with all their knowledge, with all the wisdom of the serpent, with all the wisdom of the superior dimensions, with an entire Atlantean knowledge.
Samael incarnates in Aun Weor in the year 1954, and practically, that October 27th, waits for the year to end, and already the next year he heads to Central America. For what we have heard, for what is said, he does that journey from Colombia to Panama, from Panama to Costa Rica, and in each one of these places he founds the Gnostic movement, obviously always the revelation. He will exactly know the mission he has to complete in each of these places. He went by Honduras, Salvador, Guatemala inclusive, until crossing the frontier, and he located not in Mexico City properly, but in Toluca, which is distant enough from Mexico City, since due to the economic power that Master Samael had at that moment, he cannot allow himself the luxury of staying or arriving to a place like Mexico City. That will happen later. The important thing is that we are already speaking beyond the year 55, 56, 57, 58, and in the year 58, the message of Aquarius comes out where he practically summarizes all that has been written in the first books, like the Door of Entrance to Initiation, the Revolution of Bel, Secret Notes of a Guru, Igneous Rose, Occult Medicine, the first version of Occult Medicine, those first books that he published, and where the message of Aquarius somehow comes out already properly from Mexico. In other words, Master Samael is already located in Central America, Mexico, to, from there, give to humanity that message so clear and so definitive about the apocalypse, about the end of time.
He arrives to Mexico, and in Mexico he faces the Venustic initiations, because with the child's birth in his heart, in the heart of the initiate, would have followed the Venustic initiations of the physical body, of the ethereal body, of the astral body, of the mental body, of the causal body, of the body of the conscience, of the body of the intimate, and the 8th Venustic initiation, that is, the sacred sepulchre, as he well explains it in his book, The 3 Mountains.
There in the sacred sepulchre his inner being will await, and then the soul began to carry out the works of descent to the 9 hells of Dante. That is to say, he began to live the second mountain. That whole process of change is very important for the Gnostic movement, because we'll be defining the organization's way, the way of the work, the way of understanding sexual alchemy, the death of the ego. In other words, in superior octaves, the message goes being defined, and that is left behind. But that is not left behind like a thing that doesn't have value. Instead, like something that goes leaving an imprint, and that goes marking the process that a master is undergoing and the changes that are taking place in him.
We will never be able to minimize those first works because they have the stamp, the particularity of the vision that he had as a young one in his initiatic processes, and that later on he corrected and modified in agreement to how esoterically his consciousness was expanding as he was waking up, as he went penetrating every time more and more in the being's mysteries in the initiatic path.
Therefore, the Samael of Mexico is already in the works of the second mountain, and then he will finish the descent to the infernos. He will then enter into a long pause. He'll pass to the purgatory, remain in the works of the purgatory for a period of 3-4 years, so to then get ready for the processes of the years of Job. 8. Yes, the 8 years of Job, that are the 8 initiations received in the first mountain that should be qualified. In that journey, we can say that we have an entire chronology of the works of Samael. All the Christmas messages were marking the guidelines, changes, processes, aspects that Master Samael took from other authors, and that then they were being left behind. They were overcome in agreement, too. As he was penetrating, he was waking up. He was receiving the initiations. He was dying in himself, till being able to practically get ready for what is the final process that will be taking place that year of 1977, when Samael awaits its resurrection process.
In other words, the whole work completed in 30 years. 30 years from 1917 to 1947. That would be 30 years to wake up the fire. And another 30 years from 1947 to 1977 to complete the first mountain, the second mountain, and what corresponds to the third mountain, obviously after the resurrection. As it is well said by the Venerable Master Samael in his books, and he has sometimes said, in 30 years one can do the great work. There will be those who will do it in less time. There will be those who will do it in more time. Depends if it is the first time that one does the great work, or the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time.
Information exists that in the Sierra Nevada, in the interior part, there are secret roads that go through all South America, through the hidden part, physically. And we are not only speaking of the astral world, but physically, roads that communicate the Sierra Nevada with all Central America. That is to say, places that communicate the Sierra with Mexico, with Peru, with Argentina, with Chile, with Uruguay, with Paraguay. And even more terrible is to know that there are hidden roads that go from Seville to Yucatan, old routes used by the Atlanteans.
Then again we find out that that place is a very important part of the planet, of the butt of the Andes, a very important part of the whole South American continent. That is to say that that part is the intermediate part that locates us regarding the north, what would be Mexico with the Aztecs, Olmecs, Zapotecs, with all the central part, what would be in any case the Sierra Nevada, the Chibchas, and then the rest, what follows down in South America, what would be then the Incas and all the towns that are, the Quechua that are in that part of South America. Therefore Samael is born in Colombia in 1917, lives that whole process there, because there he is liberating an energy, he is creating a precedent, he is establishing a magnetic point. Because, like other authors say, the new race, the one that comes after the Aryan race, the Korati race, will be developed in all America, from Mexico towards the United States and from Mexico towards Central America, South America, giving an emergence with all this to all the pre-Hispanic cultures.
Then, for a while, all the areas of Tibet, of Egypt, of the East, of the Middle East will rest. Those lands will rest. And the whole energy of Aquarius, of the constellation of Aquarius, the energy of the Syrian star, the energy of the absolute abstract space, in what refers to our universe, will concentrate on the American continent.
Let us say that Samael is born there because he is a Maitreya, and the Maitreya comes from the Occident, west. This time he doesn't come from the east, because the Maitreya is not expected sitting down in a lotus position. The images of the Maitreya always represent him sitting down in the Western's way, in a seat, as indicating that he comes from the west. That is to say that the current that he has established comes from the western side of the planet, and that for us has to have an important meaning, because the teachings begin this time in there due to something, to again confer to those people to get up once again. Then it seems to me that the Sierra Nevada will continue being that sacred, important place that unites in the continent to two parts of the American continent. That is, the North of America and the South of America. To get that union, that reconciliation in that part of the world, I find that important. All that I believe that the student has to know it, has to value it, to realize that the work begins there because it has an esoteric project behind it, has a spiritual project that will be developing gradually.
It's for that reason that the Gnostic teachings that in itself belongs to the scope of the eternal cannot be understood through an incarnation or caught inside the concept of time or stages of time, but as a process in which we go through ourselves, all so that we are able to find the appropriate moment, the appropriate hour, the appropriate body, the appropriate situation, in order to definitively, in 30 years, do the great work. In that lies the wonderful thing.
The proposal of an avatar is not directly that you self-realize, as a minimum, that you be able to be born, or at least to be able to, by dying, be born, or by being born to die, to become a bodhisattva. In other words, to create a soul, to crystallize a soul, in such a way that you can live 108 existences, 109 existences, 110 existences, 111. In other words, that the opportunities don't be closed for you, which are closed for the humanoid who is not interested in these topics, and that because he runs out of the 108 existences and doesn't have any other remedy, that to fall back towards involution, in a first cycle, in a second one, in a third one, a fourth one. 3,000 cycles, which is terrible, without having never aspired self-realization, and have lived 3,000 times the horrors of the inferno, 3,000 times the horrors of involution. Like to say not only to go once to hell, but leaving there to return again. Terrible. Only by thinking about it, one is horrified that it is this way. At least we drink from the glass of forgetfulness, and all that is left behind, kept in the unconscious, in the subconscious of the soul.
All this leads us to meditate, to realize how many opportunities we have. If us, having difficulties for alchemy, having difficulties for the sacrifice for humanity, having physical, economic, spiritual, psychological limitations as to follow the road. However, we have the teachings. And why do we have them?
Why would they have given it to us? Or is it simply to fool us? Or is it the gods enjoy with the masochism of giving us the teachings and then abandoning us? Will there not be hope then? If to somebody the teachings arrive, it will be for a reason. Some hope will be there. It is certain that the hope can get lost, mainly if one doesn't have hope and doesn't accept the hope in the heart. But if one accepts it, you have an opportunity. The time and when does not matter. You have an opportunity. It doesn't matter the age in which you have received this. You have a hope, an opportunity. It is wonderful that he, Samael, teaches us all this. And that sometimes we have the impression of a Samael sitting down on a throne that seems was already born a master. And that he walked as a master, and that he died as a master, and that he was resurrected as a master, and that he never met the life of us humans, or that he has never suffered the pains of karma, or the life of a humanoid, and that he ignores completely all that. In other words, that in order to be able to be an avatar, first he should have completed the school that made him and that taught him so much, and that allows him to speak like he does in his books with knowledge of cause.
Surely that this is applicable also to Jesus' figure. He had to have known the life of a fallen bodhisattva. He had to have suffered it in order to then be able to have the spiritual authority to teach the path to others.
It is true that in this whole project, masters like Litalantes, Robolu, Samael, and many others that we hear about participate, trying for all this to be completed. But we, to the Supreme, end up being something like students of a first chamber, of a meditation chamber or missionaries, which in fact are few, trying to carry ahead a preconceived plan that moves many things. And that, I repeat, it's very difficult to have the complete picture of all that moves in the area of the being.
Samael has arrived in the right moment, so that the monads of those who have to get up, those virgins that will help in their work to many fallen bodhisattvas, as well as the last ones, have the opportunity to receive in their houses the perfect matrimony, the message of Aquarius, zodiacal course, revolutionary psychology, Pistis Sophia, etc., etc. In other words, this is the work that the Avatar has done in a first phase, that we now think has finished, but that it's only the first phase.
And the following phase is to wait for this seed to germinate, and that the formation of a group of people take place then, not in the external aspect, now in the internal aspect, through revelation, through the awakening of the Kundalini, or that the one that didn't want to travel the path was defined in front of the teachings of Samael. And of course it will surely be this way, that one will enter to the second death, of which he speaks so much in his books, to the involutive process, because he or she didn't want to accept this process. Or probably when the teachings had arrived, as a fallen bodhisattva, with the karma that he or she had, he or she did not have the opportunity to be able to deploy all its abilities, of putting in action the three factors in order to be able to rise in that incarnation. Therefore, there will also be a return or reincarnation of these bodhisattvas in new bodies to find better conditions and to then access to the superior teachings. So all of this is a side of a secret and invisible part of what happens in the work of Samael and that we ignore.
How can one notice all this? The only way is through revelation. Through internal experiences, one begins to realize that the Gnostic movement seemingly disappears in a country, seemingly transforms and goes to another country, and goes to other, and expands to the world. And it seems like all efforts are useless, and like practically the whole crop is lost, when in fact, there is a secret part that continues working.
Only one that is walking the path will be able to realize that in spite of everything, internally the work continues, and that now it is a question of waiting for the great catastrophe, so that this being, this angel that requested the opportunity, together with Samael, of giving time as for those that were to be sealed in their foreheads, who will be part of the Exodus, who will be part of the new race, that they get the opportunity to do so. That's the margin of time that we are now living. Amid these symptoms of war, rumors of war, economic crisis, moral crisis, the spiritual crisis, confusion, chaos in all the senses, there's a group of people that are working, a small group of people that Master Samael said was of more than 5,000 people.
It is necessary to win the Exodus in one's inner self. The Exodus is not won by going to live on a mountain or taking refuge in a canyon or in a cavern. In fact, the Exodus is won in the midst of this Kali Yuga, and it is won making the needed sacrifices for humanity. In this way, if the Exodus merely physical comes to us, congrats. But what's important is to belong to the spiritual Exodus, to the Exodus of the being's inner parts that are being developed, that are being formed as we go working in the Father's great work. That is to say, this is the great opportunity to be able to be a part of a new golden age.
The event of the year 1954 was a very big event. The 5th of the 7th, Samael entered in Aun Weor. This has happened secretly, like Jesus' coming also happened.
An avatar does not have the intentions of creating a church, a religion, simply to give a wake-up call to our mind, in order to awaken our memory, to touch our heart to the sensitivity of returning to the being again. The avatars have the duty of making us remember that there is a cosmic Christ, that there is a Logos, and that all depends on him, and that he is the entrance door to that government, to that celestial Jerusalem, and we should not waste that opportunity. This, I believe, is what's important from the teachings, and what's important from Christ's message. Since Christ's message is forgiveness, compassion, always gives an opportunity. There is not that feeling of vengeance. Justice is not as we imagine it. It is not that the divinity enjoys punishing and condemning the poor earthlings. No, there is great compassion, and it is understood perfectly that good and bad are part of the same thing, that it is a question of your understanding. In fact, you are the one that transforms the life into the good or the wrong. If you change internally, then you will have a yin-yang vision of life, and you will reach Tao's line, and you will understand the path of the middle. Therefore, the life, the planet, the existences are opportunities that are offered to each one of us. That, I believe, is what we have to make, to open that door so that the Gnostic message, Master Samael's message, be understood completely, and not the defeatism, the pessimism of believing that I am not prepared for this. This is not possible for me. This is very difficult.
How wonderful it is to know that we have this being's teachings, and that for that reason it inconveniences, bothers some people that still dream, fantasize with a kind of spirituality, more of a pseudo-type, and they don't understand the graveness of the moments that we live. The teaching of the Logos is vertical, it's radical. One takes it or leaves it. As he used to say, one is never nearer to self-realization than when one is close to the fifth of the seven. One is never closer of falling down into the abyss than when one is next to the fifth of the seven. In other words, in front of Samael you are defined in a line, or you are defined in the other one. Because he comes to define you, he has no need to come to tell you stories. He comes to tell you the things just as they are, and like how they are. He comes to call the things by their own name. And that, of course, inconveniences a great part of humanity, because everybody doesn't like the truth. It puts us in a negative situation. It moves our floor since we have an idea of the truth, and it is that it's not this way. It is that the thing is a lot more serious than what we ourselves imagine.
What would have happened? In fact, it could have happened that the Bodhisattva had not responded to the demands of the moment, to the demands of Samael, to the necessity of opening the Aquarian era. Because it is not enough that the Aquarian era happens in the infinite space and that the constellations and the planets join in relation to that constellation and that will receive the Aquarian influence. One will say that would be enough, but no, the channels are needed, and the means are needed, and the doctrine is necessary, and that the messenger that announces to the human beings that this is happening is necessary. And besides that, he divulges a message. That, it seems, was part of a dangerous moment in the life of Samael, as a mission to complete the fact that the Bodhisattva was fallen, and that since the Bodhisattva was still bundled to the ego, bundled to its fall, Samael relates in one of his books that his being took him out continually in astral body. Continually his being woke him up in the internal worlds and whipped him and will tell him, will you serve me or won't you be good for the opening of the new Aquarian era? You have to get up. In other words, it was a tremendous effort. And to me, this makes me think that sometimes our yearning is not enough, that how important it is that behind this monad making that zeal, that big effort, as for a rebel as him, maybe like he said, of the 7 cosmo creators, Samael is the 5th one, whose soul, whose bodhisattva, whose dhyani bodhisattva is the one that has fallen the most, that has suffered the most.
How important it was that the Avatar arrived in order for all those beings to meet with him in the Sierra Nevada, and to continue doing so now in so many places on Earth. How many bodhisattvas will be getting closer at this time to him, and he will be giving them the help? That is to say, how is it conferred by part of the Logos, by the Christ, so much ability to an avatar, so that he can give his hand to these beings, as for him to define at the end of a race, its destiny. It is important to point out how vital it was that he got up. If not, it was the failure, not alone for Samael, but the failure for the plans of the Golden Age.
In other words, the mission of an avatar is not only to form a universal Christian Gnostic movement, or to form an association of Gnostic anthropology, or to create an association of Gnostic anthropology, an Iga, an Aga, or a Seg. The work of an avatar goes beyond that we can imagine. It is in favor of humanity as a whole, and of all those bodhisattvas that we don't go now to judge them, but that rather in his days they did what they had to do. They prepared the whole path for Jesus' incarnation. Jesus completed his mission. He continues still completing it. And since it was the first time or second time that many of those bodhisattvas had elaborated the Philosopher's Stone, they fell and they rose with that experience, again increased the power of their Philosopher's Stone. And these same bodhisattvas contribute to attract others to the path. Yes, planet Earth is something very interesting. We only see the black side of planet Earth, but as a laboratory, it's an incredible thing. Then Samael, with all this, does a giant mission that we are not even able to imagine.
It is very sad to think of how many souls, having either known the teachings or having never heard of them, won't really have the opportunity to touch on or tread this path. No, and I think that in fact it can be that it happens that way for many reasons. Because it's their karma, or because there simply were not the necessary merits. But that us, who have received the blessed grace of being given the Gnosis, because it is that, a grace emanated from the Father, we should value immensely the historical moment we are living, and understand that the situation is graver than what we ourselves think, and therefore dedicate all our efforts to cooperate in the great work with our own work as well, with uniting so that all the plans of the White Lodge be carried out.
What Gnostic mystery is this one? That while many souls in this planet will be able to know the Gnostic teachings of the fifth of the seven, Samael Aun Weor, there are also souls that never will not be able to even simply touch one of its wonderful books. Would that be because it is not their time? Because there are not yet enough merits? Or who knows why? That, only the being knows it. And that we have the teachings of the Cosmo creators, creators of worlds and of solar men, in spite of our ignorance, in spite of our karma, it's also another Gnostic mystery. Without a doubt, having the teachings of how to create the authentic man is a privilege, a blessing from above, and in consequence, a great responsibility. Not to respond to that, not to realize that, is serious. Nevertheless, self-realization is not an obligation, and this is also another mystery. For that, we should not make simple efforts, but rather super efforts, in order to understand the dimension of what's happening in our lives, which genuinely is a golden opportunity, an opportunity that few times repeats itself in the soul's pilgrimage in a world. As our master Samael would say, it's the hour of big decisions. A step back and we would be lost.
Lo único que sí me interesa es llevar la enseñanza a todos los rincones del mundo, sin distinciones de raza, sexo, credo, casta o color. Que toda la humanidad reciba la doctrina. Eso es todo. Paz inverencial.